For their North London rivals Tottenham Hotspur, and Rory McIlroy has a day to forget, but it set up one of the great Masters Sundays. Joining me to discuss it all, Miguel Delaney, chief football writer at The Independent, Charlotte Dunker, football reporter for The Times, and Dan Kilpatrick, deputy news editor at The Athletic. Great to have you all here. Let's see what's making the headlines this morning. Squeaky gun time is the headline in the Mirror as Arsenal lose to Bournemouth, breathing fresh life into the title race. To the Telegraph, who carry quotes from Mikel Arteta, who says the loss is like a punch in the face. They also feature Rory McIlroy's rollercoaster day at Augusta National. He'll start the final round as co-leader. The Sun also reports on those Arteta comments, plus Tyson Fury calling out Anthony Joshua following his convincing win last night. Punch and gloomy, say the Express, plus take it to the Maximus as the pre-race favourite wins the Grand National. A good day for Liverpool features on the front of the Sun goals, but can they use it as inspiration for PSG on Tuesday? A frustrated Mikel Arteta is pictured on the back of the Star as they leave the door open for Manchester City to get back into the title race. And oh, Rory is the headline in the Sunday Times as McIlroy's six-shot lead evaporates in the space of a few hours. OK, let's get into it then, and let's start with the Sunday Mirror, because they focus, as many of the papers do this Sunday morning, on that defeat for Arsenal at the Emirates at home to Bournemouth. Mikel, you were there. How damaging was that defeat for Arsenal, and what was the most worrying aspect, do you think, if you're an Arsenal fan?
Well, I think there are many concerning elements. I mean, talk about the most damaging. I think the biggest there actually is that there have been a few occasions in 2026 when Arsenal have had the opportunity to press home an advantage and really put proper daylight as well as pressure on City to respond. They haven't taken them. They've been fortunate so far that City have had some surprising slips, and this was the latest of them. But I think this, for all the kind of talk about anxiety, the tension around the club, I think there were two specifically newly concerning aspects of this defeat. One was that Bournemouth basically followed Pep Guardiola's template from the Carabao Cup final, and they just did a tactical number on Arsenal. And this was with Raya in goal rather than Kepa, which had been seen as kind of key in that final. Now, not everyone's going to be able to press like Bournemouth, but clearly teams have spotted something in Arsenal, how they're locked into an approach that they can get at. And obviously this could be very influential ahead of next Sunday and this big showdown. But secondly, and I think this is where there is the main worry, and it's feeding into a lot of debate you're seeing about Arsenal fans now, where if you look at a game like that, and a game where Arsenal, ultimately, they have to get the result, even though a draw mightn't have been too bad for them, there was never a spell in the game where, when you think about Arsenal at their best under Arteta, or even in games where they haven't been at their best and they've had to get a win, where, other than Eze when he came on, a player was getting their foot in the ball, where they were creating these waves of attacks. There was never any concerted spell of pressure, other than these kind of half chance to Gyökeres, again, a massive source of debate there. He got his two chances, but they were sort of out of nothing. And I suppose this kind of, it articulates, I think, this feeling with Arsenal for a while. This season, more than recent seasons, they've been a team that play within the margins. And when those margins are closed, like in a game like yesterday, it looks like they don't have the responses they used to.
Charlotte, just picking up on what Miguel said there, the papers are not backward in coming forward in their criticism of Mikel Arteta and Arsenal. Oliver Holt's piece in the Mail on Sunday, he says this incarnation of Arsenal looks shot to pieces with nerves and trepidation and exhaustion, both mental and physical. They can see the finish line, but they are shrinking away from it. And if you look at Sam Wallace's piece in the Sunday Telegraph as well, he focuses on what happened at the Emirates yesterday. He says, look, it was there from early on, a kind of dread that stalks the Emirates now. Are Arsenal about to blow the Premier League title? The possibility hardened over the course of a game that was tough going for those home fans who have rationalised what has gone before on the basis on what they hope is to come. Those words, nerve, bottle, they've come to the fore once again. Are they losing their nerve at precisely the wrong time again?
I think if we look at how they've been performing, I think from the turn of the year, can we argue that they've played really, really well? Arguably not, but they're really effective and efficient in what they know they're good at in terms of defending really well, performing really well with the set pieces, getting a 1-0 lead and getting it over the line. But you're right in terms of the nerves. I thought as the clock was ticking down yesterday, Mikel was just talking about it, they got in and around the box. They looked nervous. They were just hashing at chances. Gyökeres, there was time to take a touch. He wouldn't. He just hit it first time, wouldn't get it on target. They never looked like they were going to get back in the game. And I think, obviously, the longer it went on, the fans, we heard them boo at full time. They're nervous. They've seen their team come runner-up too many times. This was supposed to be the time for them. And in an ideal world, but they had such daylight between them and second that this should have been like a pedestrian champions last few weeks of the season, like it was for Liverpool in the last campaign, whereas now they've been dragged into this cat and mouse thing, really worried about what Man City are going to do. They can say we're only focused on ourselves, we're not bothered about City. Of course they're bothered about City. They've obviously got a massive game today, and that showdown next week at the Etihad is going to be absolutely massive. So I think the nerves have definitely crept in, but that's as a result of what has happened in the last 3 seasons, and can they see history repeating itself?
To Charlotte's point, I think an interesting aspect of that, and the nerves Arsenal felt yesterday and the stadium felt, is Arteta's role pre-match and kind of bigging the game up, because he did this whole thing in his press conference about have an early breakfast, it's an early kick-off, bring your lunch, bring your dinner, which now kind of threatens to be a potentially memorable line if Arsenal do blow this title race. And actually that game arguably should have been a fairly routine home game for the champions-elect. Bournemouth are a good side. They were unbeaten in 12, was it, or 11?
Since the Arsenal defeat, actually.
Since the Arsenal defeat,
yeah.
But they're still 13th in the table, I think. You know, they're still a mid-table side. So bigging that game up for Arteta arguably hasn't worked. You know, it's fed into the nerves. It's fed into the sense that there's this jittery mood around the Emirates and that Arsenal kind of need to get a result, when actually, if you think about City and kind of seasons gone by, when they've walked to the title, they've approached these games in a very calm, kind of business-like manner and done the job.
It is something that has been picked up by the Sunday Mirror, because their headline is Manic Mix Losing Head. Is that a bit over the top? Because if they had won as people had expected them to, people would have looked at what he did pre-match and said, well, actually, that was a masterstroke.
Yeah, I mean, you always work backwards from the result on these things, right? Like, if Arsenal had won that game, you'd be saying, oh, you know, fair play to Arteta. He built it up. He played on the significance of the occasion. And the fans responded. And I think, you know, from the sounds of it, Mikel was there, I wasn't. The fans were good from the start of the game, and then the nerves kind of crept in based on Arsenal's performance. So it could have gone another way. But I think Arteta is an emotional guy, right? And he plays on the emotion. And he is occasionally a kind of gimmicky manager. You know, he has these plays and they often work really well. And I guess when they don't work, or when, you know, the emotion isn't channeled in a positive way, you know, it can go wrong, and then fingers will be pointed at him.
Just picking up on that, Charlotte, Martin Samuel in the Sunday Times, he says, look, the irony is Arsenal don't have to play like Manchester City to win the league. They can play like Manchester United, they can play like Everton, hell, they can play like Bournemouth. They just can't play like that. It doesn't matter what the points differential stands, as if Arsenal cannot find their mojo again. Keep playing like this, and if City draw level, Arsenal are done. How big is a challenge this now for Arteta, both on and off the pitch, and his players clearly on the pitch as well? Because you mentioned it before, what has happened in those 3 previous seasons, however much Mikel Arteta, and I've been to his news conferences, won't refer to what's happened, there's clearly going to be scar tissue there, isn't there? Yeah,
of course. All the players will know. They'll think, we've been here before, surely this can't happen again, especially look how much money they invested in the summer. This was supposed to be their season, and for the majority of it, it has been. And Arteta came up with a plan. That plan has been working. He's been criticised for not having this exciting, amazing, beautiful product of football to watch. But I think that's what Martin Samuel's referring to there. Like, don't go out now and start to try and play beautiful football like we've seen Manchester City do in the past, because that's not got you to where you are now. You've got to where you are now by being pragmatic, by being solid at the back, and by being exceptional at set pieces. But if you're getting worked out, you're going to have to find a different way. And I think when you talk about sorting things on the pitch, I think one of the biggest things about yesterday was everyone knew what Bournemouth were going to go there and do yesterday. Arteta would have known what they were going to go there and do yesterday, but they just couldn't find a way to get around it. And I think that's what's so alarming. So there are many issues for him to fix in the well, it's a huge week. They've got Champions League again, haven't they, in a couple of days?
Sam Dean from the Sunday Telegraph was at the Emirates as well. His piece starts, on this dark day in Arsenal season, there were disconnects all over the Emirates Stadium between the defence and the midfielders, between the midfielders and the forwards, and perhaps most damagingly of all, between the players and the supporters. Miguel, you were there at the Emirates. The narrative has been about this noise around Arsenal and how they're gripped with anxiety and nerves way before the end of the season, because I'm sure you've sat here and said, well, if they're feeling like this 20 games before the end of the season, what's it going to be like
absolutely.
with 6 or 7 games to go? You witnessed it yesterday. How can that narrative be changed? Is it down to the fans? Does it start with Arteta? How does it change?
The one thing I would say for Arsenal in this situation is, to be fair to Arteta, they've had 2 big moments like this. One was after the defeat to Manchester United. Another was after the 2-2 draw against Wolves. And in both situations, from what I've heard about, on the training ground, within the dressing room, and also what he said in public, I think he has done a very good job of realising what was needed, taking the temperature down, and just ensuring they responded. So to be fair, after the Wolves game, they won at Spurs 4-1. Maybe the opposition helped in that sense, and the type of game it was. But they have gone on a 4-game winning run since then. Then after the Manchester United game, it was actually one of the few games in 2026 that's been comfortable for them, a 4-0 win away to Leeds. So he has been good at that. But of course, he's got 2 challenges there as well. One, how often can you keep saying the same thing? And 2, the closer you get, obviously, the nerves and the edge becomes different. So this is a massive challenge. Maybe the Sporting game actually helps this week because it breaks up the week a bit. There's the possibility, or the strong possibility, you'd say, they get through to the Champions League semi-final. First time in the club's history they'll have got to 2 in a row. Alternatively, if Sporting sends blood, suddenly this could plunge them into a crisis. So, to be fair to Arteta, I would say he's managed this well. But again, it's that test amplified once more.
But it's on such a knife edge at the minute. And because of what's happened historically, everyone's predicting the outcome and that they're going to keep losing and they're going to keep dropping points and that it's going to be, we're all going to sit at the end of the season and be writing about how have Arsenal not managed to win the league again. But it's so tight that if they go to City next weekend and they win, people will be sitting on this show the week after that saying, aren't Arsenal amazing? Because because the swing would have gone back in their favour. It literally only takes them to City to slip up a tiny bit and Arsenal to capitalise on that. And I know the reason why we're having these conversations is because we're not seeing that from Arsenal at the minute. We're not seeing them produce those performances that we saw earlier in the season. And the mentality issue is there as a talking point for a reason. But it is so tight. And he just needs to get them up for that game next Sunday as like a final. And if they go there and win, then the whole mood around everything will change.
Yeah. And obviously all of this, you mentioned it as well, Darmish, about with City don't go through the same thing. But that's obviously because of the inherent knowledge that City have won this before. And so Guardiola City never really had to go through this because it was Mancini City in 2012 that went through this process. And I do wonder whether, I think Arsenal could, quote unquote, bottle it, but only in this spell. I can see a situation there where City win today, Arsenal potentially lose next week on the back of yesterday. It gets level when City win that game in hand. But a little like what happened in 2012 with City after, funny enough, it was Arteta that scored the winning goal at Arsenal to beat them 1-0 and City were in meltdown. Suddenly that starts a new stage of the title race. And maybe if the worst happens for Arsenal, it brings some sort of just cleansing effect. Because obviously so much of this is predicated on the knowledge they haven't done it in 22 years and all on 3 second places in a row, but also just this because they've been ahead, because they've had this lead. If it gets level, I think it's potentially a new phase of the title race or the run-in.
Dan, I was sat in his news conferences pre and post Sporting and before the Bournemouth game on Friday, and he was very, very quick to point out, Mikel Arteta, about the relationship he has with the people who run Arsenal and how everyone is united and how even in adversity with those back-to-back defeats, which was for the first time this season, it was reinforced, that relationship that he has with them. So he's talking about the relationship and talking it up. If the worst-case scenario was to happen as far as Arsenal are concerned and neither of these big trophies come to the Emirates, what happens with Mikel Arteta? Does he go again?
That's a big question. I think there'll be some fan unrest if Arsenal don't win anything this year. I think that's kind of natural and understandable. It's so hard to say, isn't it? Because we just don't know. As Mikel says, that there's so many scenarios, there's so many different ways this can go. I think a lot of people are kind of assuming that City are going to win that game. It's almost like people are factoring in those 3 points for City. But actually, I think before the Carabao Cup final, Arsenal were unbeaten in 6 games against City. So they're still in a pretty strong position going into that match. I don't know what's going to happen with Arteta. That maybe he'll decide he wants to go again. Maybe the decision will be with him. Maybe he'll decide he's had enough. He'd have no shortage of offers if he did. But I think it's just too early to say. And he made the point after the press conference that Arsenal would have taken this position in August. And I think that's obviously true. They're still in a position of strength. They're having a bit of a wobble, but it's very much still in their hands.
Charlotte, there was another team at the Emirates yesterday. And Sam Wallace from the Sunday Telegraph says, in one technical area, Arteta's childhood teammate from San Sebastian, Andoni Iraola, a cheerful, easygoing Basque, was giving his old acquaintance a tactics masterclass. It's 12 games unbeaten. They haven't actually been beaten since they sold Antoine Semenyo. At the start of the summer, almost their entire backline was sold on to big clubs. That's what Bournemouth seemed to do. Just on Iraola himself, and Bournemouth fans won't appreciate me saying this, but has he got to be under consideration for some of the big jobs that are going to become vacant in the summer?
Of course he has, but I think one of the keys at Bournemouth is obviously he talks about the good relationship he has with the board, and he's on board with the recruit stuff. So it'd be interesting if you took him out of that environment and put him in I'm not saying he's got full control there, but if you put him in a different environment at a club that operates differently, a bigger club, as it were. We've seen managers go from mid-table clubs to bigger clubs, and the pressure around it and the scrutiny of every word in your press conference being digested and pulled apart and that sort of thing. It does affect people differently, but the job that he's done there is exceptional. Like you say, at the start of the season, if you look at what happened in the summer to them, losing their first choice backline, and then in January, Semenyo, he'd already scored 10 goals for them. Where are the goals going to come from? And they just seem to find different players. Krupi's been exceptional. Ryan, who came in to replace Semenyo, has hit the ground running there, hasn't he? So I think their recruitment and their model has been absolutely brilliant, and they've got a level-headed manager who is very good at setting his team up in the right way. They play to their strengths, and he's on for another record-breaking season for Bournemouth.
They just look like such a well-coached team, to Charlotte's point. Like, every single player knows their job. They look fit, they look tactically smart, and he's improving them as well, which is a sign of a great coach. But to Charlotte's other point, Bournemouth kind of have the air of one of those clubs, a bit like Brentford and Brighton, and we've seen them lose managers and get better, who are just so well-run, and the system and the ideology and everything about the club is kind of bigger than the coach, isn't it? And Iraola did an interview with my colleague Adam Crafton in the summer where he said he doesn't really choose the players. That's Thiago Pinto, who's the director of football operations, is picking players. He doesn't know about the market by his own admission, Iraola. So Bournemouth struck me as a club. If they did lose him, and there's a vacancy at Athletic Bilbao where he's used to play and he's been linked with that. If they did lose him this summer, I feel like they are a smart enough club to get another coach in to work within that existing structure and system and keep moving forward.
Brilliant stuff. That's it for the first part of Sunday Supplement. Big week ahead, no doubt, for Arsenal. After the break, we will be talking about the other end of that title race. Manchester City, of course, they go to Stamford Bridge in a huge game on Super Sunday this afternoon. And we've got this in the mirror. Let's get ready to rumble. See what they've done there.